The unexpected encounter. Kayla's starship floated silently above the rocky surface of an unfamiliar moon. She leaned back in her sleek chair, her shimmering gown of silken Arathian fabric glowing faintly under the soft light of the control panels. She pressed a button and sighed. "Still no response," she muttered, her voice edged with frustration. The Heiress of Arathos Prime, Kayla was used to command and control. On her home planet, she could summon an army with a flick of her wrist. Here, on this desolate rock, she was just another stranded traveler. Her starship had suffered a sudden and mysterious power failure, leaving her alone and helpless in the void. She had sent out multiple distress signals, confident that a rescue ship would arrive within moments. Hours later, the only reply came from a vessel that seemed older than the dust on the moon's surface. Kayla narrowed her piercing violet eyes at the screen as it displayed a rusty, battered ship descending toward her. The ship looked like it had been salvaged from a scrapyard. Its panels were mismatched, the engines sputtered, and the hull bore the marks of countless space battles or poorly executed repairs. "Is this a joke?" she hissed. "Do they think I'm some common traitor?" The ship landed with a loud clunk that echoed across the rocky landscape. A moment later, the hatch opened, and out stepped a human. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a simple brown jacket and scuffed boots. His dark hair was messy, and his hands were rough with years of manual work. Kayla raised an eyebrow as she observed him through her screen. Humans were considered a lesser species on her world, and she had rarely encountered one up close. She found their simplicity amusing, even quaint, but hardly worthy of respect. The man approached her ship and activated the communicator on his wrist. His voice crackled through her speakers. "Name's Jack. Got your distress signal. Need a hand?" Kayla stared at the screen, her lips curling into a smirk. "You must be mistaken," she replied, her tone dripping with condescension. "I require assistance from a qualified technician, not whatever you are." Jack tilted his head and gave a half-smile. "Suit yourself, lady, but judging by the smoke coming from your engines, I'd say you're out of options." Kayla's pride flared, but she glanced at the flickering control panels. She hated to admit it, but he was right. The ship's condition was worse than she had let herself believe. Still, the idea of accepting help from a scruffy human was unbearable. "I'll manage," she snapped, cutting the transmission. Outside, Jack crossed his arms and chuckled softly. "Stubborn one," he muttered. He walked back to his ship, but before he could climb inside, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath him. He froze, scanning the horizon. The rocky surface of the moon cracked and groaned, small fissures spreading like veins across the landscape. Inside her ship, Kayla's sensors blared warnings. She frowned, checking the data. The moon's crust was unstable. The energy readings suggested an imminent geological collapse. For the first time, fear crept into her chest. She reopened the communicator. "Jack," she said, her voice quieter this time. He stopped and turned. "Changed your mind already?" "The moon is unstable," she admitted reluctantly. "My sensors indicate a structural failure in its core." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I noticed. That's why I landed close by. Figured you'd need more than just engine repairs to get out of here alive." Kayla bristled at his casual tone. "Do you have the equipment to stabilize my ship?" "Depends on the damage," he said, walking toward her again. "But we should probably talk inside. Being out here isn't safe." Kayla hesitated, then pressed a button to lower her ship's ramp. Jack stepped inside, glancing around at the lavish interior. His boots clunked loudly on the polished floors, and he couldn't help but whistle at the sheer luxury. "Nice setup," he said. "Shame it's falling apart." Kayla glared at him. "Fix it, or leave. I don't have time for idle chatter." Jack shrugged and got to work, inspecting the control panels and engine systems. His hands moved with surprising skill, and Kayla found herself watching him despite her annoyance. "The power core's fried," he said after a moment. "You're lucky I've got a spare on my ship. Shouldn't take long to swap it out." "You carry power cores on that rust bucket?" she asked skeptically. Jack grinned. "You'd be surprised what this rust bucket can do." Kayla crossed her arms, hiding her unease. The tremors outside were growing stronger, and she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. And she hated it. As Jack headed back to his ship to retrieve the part, Kayla glanced at the cracks forming in the ground outside. She couldn't shake the feeling that this human was her only chance at survival. For now, she would endure his presence, but she silently vowed to regain control as soon as her ship was functional again. Little did she know, this encounter was about to change her life forever. A clash of worlds. Kayla stood at the top of her ship's ramp, arms crossed, her shimmering violet hair catching the dim light of the alien sun. Below, Jack rummaged through a storage compartment in his patchwork ship, humming a tune she didn't recognize. Her sharp gaze followed him, annoyance bubbling under her composed exterior. "This is absurd," she muttered to herself. The heir to the Arathian dominion, relying on him. Jack emerged with a toolbox slung over his shoulder and a coil of cable in his hand. He didn't bother looking up as he spoke. "You can glare at me all you want, princess, but I'm the best chance you've got." Kayla's eyes narrowed. "It's Kayla, not princess, and I wouldn't need you if my signal had reached someone more qualified." Jack smirked and climbed the ramp. "You're welcome to fire me anytime. Just say the word, and I'll be gone." He dropped the toolbox on her pristine floor with a loud clang, making her flinch. "Must you treat everything like it's a piece of junk?" she snapped, gesturing at the scratches toolbox left on the polished surface. "Must you treat everyone like they're beneath you?" he countered without missing a beat. Kayla bristled but said nothing. She watched as Jack knelt by the engine panel, his movements surprisingly precise for someone she had written off as a scavenger. His hands moved with practiced ease, disconnecting wires and scanning components with a handheld device that looked older than her childhood toys. "Do you even know what you're doing?" she asked, unable to hide her skepticism. Jack didn't look up. "Lady, I've patched up ships held together with duct tape and hope. Yours is practically brand new compared to those." He glanced over his shoulder, grinning. "Though I get why you're worried. Fancy folks like you probably don't see a lot of hard work." Kayla's jaw tightened. "Hard work? You think flying a fleet, negotiating with empires, and managing an entire planet is easy?" Jack chuckled. "Sure sounds easier than hauling scrap across the galaxy and dodging pirates every other day." Their words clashed like swords, neither willing to back down. But before Kayla could deliver a sharp retort, the ship trembled beneath them. She stumbled, her balance momentarily lost, and Jack reached out instinctively to steady her. "Careful," he said, his tone gentler now. "This moon's got a nasty attitude." Kayla pulled away quickly, her pride stinging more than her dignity. "I don't need your help." Jack sighed and returned to his work. "You keep saying that, but here we are." The tremors subsided, but the tension between them lingered. Kayla found herself pacing the narrow corridor, her mind racing. Despite his gruff demeanor and irritating confidence, Jack seemed to know what he was doing. His scanners had detected the moon's instability before hers had, and he had already spotted issues in her ship that she hadn't noticed. But trusting him meant acknowledging her own limitations, and that was a bitter pill to swallow. As Jack worked, he began whistling again, a soft, jaunty tune that filled the silence. Kayla frowned. "Must you make that noise?" "It helps me focus," Jack replied, not missing a beat. "You should try it sometime. Might help with that stick-up your—" "Enough," Kayla snapped, her cheeks flushing. She turned sharply and headed for the cockpit, desperate for some distance. Jack chuckled softly as she disappeared around the corner. "Touchy," he muttered. In the cockpit, Kayla leaned against the control console, her fingers gripping the edges. The view outside offered little comfort. The barren landscape stretched endlessly, broken only by the jagged cracks spreading like veins across the surface. Each tremor was a reminder of how precarious her situation had become. Her thoughts were interrupted by Jack's voice over the ship's intercom. "Kayla, you might want to see this." She hesitated, then pressed the button to respond. "What is it?" "Just get down here. Trust me." Grumbling under her breath, Kayla made her way back to the engine room. Jack was crouched by an exposed section of wiring, his expression unusually serious. He held up a small device displaying fluctuating energy readings. "This isn't just a mechanical issue," he said. "There's a buried power source nearby, and it's putting out some wild readings. It's messing with your ship's systems." Kayla frowned, kneeling beside him to get a closer look. "A power source? Here, that's impossible. This moon is uninhabited." Jack gave her a pointed look. "Then maybe someone, or something, left it here. Whatever it is, it's dangerous." She studied the readings, her mind racing. If what he said was true, then this wasn't just a simple repair mission. The power source could be the key to understanding the moon's instability, or its ultimate destruction. For the first time, Kayla felt a flicker of something she rarely experienced: doubt. Maybe, just maybe, this scruffy human wasn't as useless as she thought. Jack stood, offering her a hand. "So, what's it gonna be? Work together, or keep pretending you've got this all figured out?" Kayla looked up at him, her pride warring with the reality of their situation. Slowly, she took his hand and stood. "Let's see what you've got, human." Jack's grin returned, and for the first time, Kayla wondered if there was more to him than met the eye. The dangerous secret. The moon's surface trembled violently, sending loose rocks tumbling down the jagged cliffs. Kayla gripped the doorway of her ship, her violet eyes scanning the horizon. Fissures spidered out in every direction, glowing faintly with an ominous light. This was no ordinary geological event, and she knew it. Inside the ship, Jack worked quickly, sweat beading on his forehead as he connected the replacement power core to Kayla's failing engine system. He muttered under his breath, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency, but something nagged at him. Something he couldn't shake since his instruments first detected the strange energy signature below the moon's surface. "Kayla," he called out, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "We need to talk." She appeared in the doorway, her expression a mix of irritation and impatience. "Unless you fixed my ship, I don't see the point." Jack straightened, his gaze serious. "This isn't just about your ship. There's something buried under this moon, a power source or reactor, maybe. It's unstable, and it's triggering the tremors." Kayla raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident. "A reactor? On a moon this remote? That's absurd." Jack stepped closer, holding out his handheld scanner. The screen displayed erratic spikes in energy levels, with patterns that defied natural explanation. Absurd or not, the readings don't lie. This thing is tearing the moon apart. Kayla studied the device, her lips pressed into a thin line. She hated to admit it, but the data was compelling. Still, her pride refused to let her concede completely. "If it's so dangerous, why haven't I detected it with my advanced systems?" Jack smirked faintly. "Because your advanced systems weren't calibrated for anomalies like this. They're designed for luxury, not survival." Her eyes flashed with indignation. "You have no idea what my systems are capable of." "Maybe not," he replied, his tone softening. "But I know one thing. If we don't deal with this, neither of us is getting off this moon alive." Kayla folded her arms, her mind racing. She was used to dismissing humans as inferior, but Jack's confidence and knowledge were starting to gnaw at that belief. The tremors outside grew stronger, shaking the ship enough to make the walls creak. Time was running out. "And what do you propose we do about it?" she asked, her voice sharp. Jack tilted his head toward the fissures visible through the viewport. "We find the source and shut it down. If we can stabilize it long enough to finish repairing your ship, we might have a chance." "You want me to leave my ship and venture into an unstable moon?" Kayla scoffed. "Do you realize how reckless that sounds? Jack chuckled, the sound dry and humorless. Reckless. Maybe. But staying here and waiting for the ground to swallow us isn't exactly a smart plan either. Kayla hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing on her. She was not used to uncertainty, and certainly not to taking orders from anyone, least of all a human. But as another violent quake rattled the ship, she realized she had no choice. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "But if this fails, the blame is entirely on you." Jack grinned, grabbing a satchel filled with tools and emergency gear. "Deal. Now let's get moving before this moon decides to blow us to pieces." As they stepped out onto the fractured surface, Kayla's elegant boots crunched against the rocky terrain. Jack led the way, his movements confident and sure. Despite her irritation, Kayla couldn't help but notice the steadiness in his stride, as though danger was a familiar companion to him. They followed the energy readings deeper into the moon's craggy landscape, the glowing fissures casting an eerie light. The air grew heavier with each step, and the tremors became more frequent. Kayla's heart pounded in her chest, though she refused to let it show. "Tell me," she said after a long silence, her voice cutting through the tension. "What makes you think you're qualified to handle something like this?" Jack glanced back at her, a shadow of a smile on his face. "Let's just say I've been in worse situations. You learn to adapt when the galaxy's always trying to kill you." Kayla frowned but said nothing. Her upbringing had been a life of comfort and privilege, far removed from the struggles Jack spoke of. It was a life she had always taken for granted. Until now. They reached a massive crevice, its edges glowing with an otherworldly blue light. Jack knelt by the edge, scanning the depths with his handheld device. The readings were off the charts. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "The source is down there." Kayla peered into the chasm, her pride giving way to a flicker of unease. Whatever lay below was beyond anything she had ever encountered. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jack stood, his expression grim. "Now we see just how far you're willing to go to survive." A test of trust. The chasm loomed before them, its edges glowing with an eerie blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Kayla stood at the brink, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She glanced down at Jack, who knelt at the edge, tinkering with a device that looked as cobbled together as his ship. "You're telling me we have to go down there?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. Jack didn't look up, his focus on the small drone he was calibrating. "Unless you've got a better idea, Princess, yeah. The power source is down there, and we gotta stabilize it, or this moon's going to crumble with us on it." Kayla scowled. "Stop calling me Princess." Jack smirked. "Sure thing, Your Majesty." Kayla bit back a retort, her violet eyes narrowing. She had always prided herself on being composed, but this human's casual defiance was testing her patience, and yet there was something about his calm under pressure that kept her from dismissing him outright. The drone beeped to life, its tiny thrusters igniting as it hovered over the chasm. Jack stood and dusted off his hands. "This little guy's going to scout ahead. If there's anything dangerous down there, we'll know before we take the plunge." Kayla watched as the drone descended, its small light cutting through the darkness. The tension in the air was palpable. The moon rumbled beneath their feet, as if impatient with their hesitation. "I still don't trust you," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Jack glanced at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "That makes two of us. But trust isn't the issue right now. Survival is." Kayla hated the truth of his words. Trusting others was not something she was accustomed to. As the heir to the Arathian dominion, she had always relied on her own strength, her own intellect. Trusting a human, especially one so rough around the edges, felt like an insult to her pride. The drone's signal beeped in Jack's earpiece, and he frowned, his expression turning serious. "The readings are worse than I thought. The core's destabilizing faster than I expected. We're running out of time." Kayla's chest tightened, but she masked her fear with a haughty glare. Then let's get this over with. Jack secured a harness around his waist and tossed her one. Put it on. These lines will keep us anchored if the ground decides to give way. Kayla hesitated, inspecting the harness as though it were a foreign object. This is archaic. It's reliable, Jack shot back. Now stop stalling. Reluctantly, Kayla fastened the harness, her hands moving stiffly. Jack gave her line a firm tug to test its strength, then did the same for his own. All right, he said, his tone steady. Follow my lead and try not to look down. Kayla rolled her eyes. Do you think I'm afraid of heights? Jack grinned. Not yet. With that, he began the descent. The harness creaked under their weight as they lowered themselves into the chasm, the glowing blue light growing brighter as they went deeper. The walls of the fissure were jagged, glistening with strange crystals that hummed faintly. Kayla couldn't help but be mesmerized, despite the danger. What is this place? She murmured. Beats me, Jack replied, his voice echoing slightly. But whatever's down here, it wasn't meant to be left alone. The air grew hotter the farther they descended, and the hum of the crystals turned into a low rhythmic vibration. Kayla felt it in her chest, a strange resonance that made her uneasy. They reached a narrow ledge, and Jack signaled for her to stop. He unclipped his harness and crouched, scanning the area with his handheld device. Kayla followed suit, though her movements were far less fluid. What now? She asked, her voice low. Jack pointed to a large, glowing structure embedded in the rock wall ahead. It pulsed with a blinding blue energy, its design unlike anything she had seen before. Alien, ancient, and foreboding. That's the power source, Jack said, and it's way past its expiration date. Kayla stared at the structure, her mind racing. Can you stabilize it? Jack gave a half shrug. Maybe, if we're lucky. That's not comforting. Didn't say it would be. Kayla shook her head, frustration mounting. This is insane. Why should I risk my life for this? For you. Jack turned to her, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Because you don't have a choice, Kayla. Neither of us do. You might think you're above all this, but right now you're just as mortal as I am. His words struck a nerve, and for a moment, Kayla was silent. Then, with a deep breath, she nodded. Fine. Let's do it. Jack smiled faintly. That's the spirit. As they approached the power source, the vibrations grew stronger, the light more blinding. Kayla's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let fear control her. She glanced at Jack, who was already examining the structure with a focused intensity. For the first time, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to this human than she had ever imagined. The heart of courage. The air inside the chasm was thick, heavy with heat, and an unsettling hum that seemed to crawl into their bones. Kayla's violet hair clung to her face as she wiped away beads of sweat, her gaze fixed on the glowing alien structure before them. The device pulsed erratically, its blue light casting sharp shadows on the jagged walls. It was alive, in a way, powerful, ancient, and on the verge of collapse. Jack crouched beside the structure, his tools spread out around him. His fingers worked quickly, bypassing unfamiliar conduits and reconnecting severed circuits. Kayla watched him with a mix of irritation and growing respect. For all his rough edges, there was a precision to his movements, a confidence that she couldn't ignore. Careful, she said, her voice unusually soft. That thing looks like it could explode if you sneeze on it. Jack grinned without looking up. Good thing I don't have allergies. Kayla rolled her eyes but didn't press further. Instead, she studied the structure, trying to make sense of its alien design. Symbols etched into its surface glowed faintly, their patterns shifting in ways that defied logic. She felt a strange pull, as though the device were reaching out to her, whispering secrets she couldn't quite hear. What is this thing? She murmured, more to herself than to Jack. No idea, Jack replied, his tone unusually serious. But it's old. And angry. The ground beneath them trembled, sending loose rocks tumbling from the walls. Kayla instinctively grabbed the nearest stable surface, her sharp gaze darting to Jack. "How much longer?" she demanded, her voice tense. Jack didn't answer immediately, his focus locked on a particularly stubborn conduit. Sparks flew as he adjusted the connection, and the structure's pulsing light steadied for a moment before flaring brighter. "There's a stabilizer circuit here," he said finally. "If I can reroute the energy flow, it might buy us enough time to get back to your ship." "Might," Kayla repeated, her tone sharp. "That's not exactly reassuring." Jack glanced up at her, his expression calm despite the chaos around them. "Look, I get it. You're not used to uncertainty. But out here, sometimes might is all you get. So unless you've got a magic wand hidden in that fancy outfit, let me do my job." Kayla opened her mouth to retort but stopped herself. She hated feeling out of control, hated the vulnerability that came with relying on someone else. But as much as it stung, she knew Jack was right. She crossed her arms and stepped back, giving him space. Another quake shook the chasm, more violent than the last. The ledge beneath their feet cracked, sending a chunk of rock plummeting into the abyss below. Kayla's heart leaped into her throat as she stumbled, but Jack's arm shot out, steadying her before she could fall. "You all right?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in the ground. Kayla nodded, her pride forcing her to brush off the near miss. "I'm fine." Jack's hand lingered on her arm for a moment longer before he turned back to the structure. He worked faster now, the stakes all too clear. The vibrations from the device were growing stronger, each pulse rattling their bones. Suddenly, the stabilizer conduit sparked violently, and Jack cursed under his breath. He yanked his hand back, shaking off the sting. "The system's overloaded. I need to reroute the flow manually." Kayla frowned. "Manually? That's suicide. The energy output could fry you." "Got a better idea." Jack shot back, already adjusting his tools. Kayla hesitated, her mind racing. For the first time, she felt the weight of responsibility, not just for herself, but for the human who had risked everything to help her. She clenched her fists, torn between her instincts to protect herself and the growing realization that Jack's courage was the only thing keeping them alive. Before she could respond, another quake rocked the chasm, and a section of the wall crumbled, sending debris cascading toward them. Kayla acted on instinct, throwing herself against Jack and pulling him to the ground just as the rocks crashed where he had been standing. They lay there for a moment, breathing heavily. Jack turned his head to look at her, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. That was unexpected. Kayla scowled, her cheeks flushing. "Don't get used to it." Jack chuckled softly, his laughter cutting through the tension like a knife. "Noted." He sat up, brushing dust from his jacket, and returned to the structure. Kayla watched him in silence, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. For all her pride, for all her insistence on superiority, she couldn't deny the bravery in front of her, the quiet, stubborn courage of a man who refused to give up, no matter the odds. As Jack reconnected the final conduit, the structure's light steadied, its pulsing hum fading into a low, steady rhythm. The ground beneath them stopped shaking, and for the first time, there was silence. Jack let out a breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. That should hold, for now. Kayla stepped forward, her voice softer than it had been all day. "You did it." Jack looked at her, his eyes tired but triumphant. "Told you we'd make it." For the first time, Kayla found herself smiling, not out of triumph, but out of genuine admiration. And that terrified her more than anything else they had faced. The final escape. The silence that followed the stabilization was as oppressive as the tension before it. Kayla stood in the dim glow of the alien structure, her arms hanging loosely at her sides. The device had stopped pulsing erratically, its light now steady and subdued, but the air still buzzed with residual energy. It felt like the calm before a storm, a fragile moment that could shatter at any second. Jack slumped against the nearest rock, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. His breathing was heavy, and his face bore a grimace of pain. Kayla's sharp eyes immediately noticed the dark scorch mark on his forearm, where the energy conduit had lashed out earlier. "You're injured," she said, her tone more matter-of-fact than concerned. Jack glanced at the burn and shrugged. "It's just a scratch. Nothing I haven't dealt with before." Kayla frowned, but before she could respond, the ground beneath them groaned ominously. A deep rumble reverberated through the chasm, shaking loose fragments of rock from the walls. The stabilization had bought them time, but the moon was still unstable, its very foundation threatening to collapse. "We need to leave," Kayla said, her voice clipped. "Now." Jack pushed himself to his feet, wincing slightly as he adjusted his satchel. "Couldn't agree more." They began their climb back to the surface, their harnesses creaking under the strain. Kayla led the way this time, her movements swift and precise, but her thoughts were anything but calm. She couldn't shake the image of Jack risking his life to stabilize the core, a task she had been too afraid to attempt. It was unsettling, this growing respect for a man she had dismissed as insignificant. Another tremor hit, more violent than the last. The harness lines jerked suddenly, and Kayla's grip slipped. She gasped as her foot found only air, her body swinging wildly over the abyss. Her heart pounded as she scrambled for a hold, but the jagged rock face offered little purchase. "Kayla." Jack's voice cut through her panic. She felt a strong hand grip her wrist, steadying her. She looked up to see him braced against the wall, his face strained with effort. "Hold on," he said through gritted teeth, pulling her back toward the ledge. Kayla gritted her teeth, anger and humiliation warring with relief. With his help, she managed to find her footing again. As she steadied herself, she avoided his gaze, hating the vulnerability she had just shown. "Thanks," she muttered begrudgingly. Jack chuckled, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "Don't mention it. Really." They continued their ascent, the glow of the surface growing brighter with each step. But the tremors were relentless, and the chasm was becoming increasingly unstable. When they finally emerged onto the surface, it felt like a temporary victory. The sky above was streaked with ominous clouds, and the fissures on the ground had widened, spewing blue energy that crackled and hissed. Kayla's ship stood in the distance, its sleek frame a stark contrast to the chaos around it. "Can your ship still fly?" Jack asked, his voice edged with urgency. Kayla nodded. "It should, thanks to your repair." "Good, because we're out of time." As they sprinted toward the ship, the ground beneath them began to crumble. Kayla felt the vibrations grow stronger with every step, the moon's final collapse imminent. She reached the ramp first, activating it with a flick of her wrist. Jack was only a few steps behind, but as he approached, the ground gave way beneath him. "Jack!" Kayla shouted, spinning around. He was hanging onto the edge of the fissure, his fingers gripping the rocky surface. The satchel he carried had fallen into the abyss, and his face was a mask of determination as he struggled to pull himself up. Kayla hesitated for only a moment before rushing to his side. She dropped to her knees and extended her hand. "Take it." Jack hesitated, his pride flickering in his eyes. "I got this." "Don't be an idiot," she snapped. "You saved me. Now let me save you." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a resigned sigh, Jack grabbed her hand. Kayla braced herself, using all her strength to haul him up. The effort was greater than she expected, but she refused to falter. With one final pull, Jack scrambled onto solid ground. They both lay there for a moment, breathing heavily. Then Jack looked over at her, his grin faint but genuine. "Didn't think you had it in you." Kayla rolled her eyes, but a small smile tugged at her lips. "I'm full of surprises." The tremors grew deafening, and Kayla sprang to her feet. "Get on the ship," she ordered, her commanding tone leaving no room for argument. Jack followed her up the ramp, and within moments they were inside the cockpit. Kayla slid into the pilot's seat, her fingers flying across the controls. The ship roared to life, its engines humming with newfound strength. As they lifted off, the ground below them collapsed entirely, the chasm swallowing the surface in a torrent of blue energy. The ship shot into the sky, narrowly escaping the moon's destruction. Jack leaned back in his seat, exhaling deeply. Well, that was fun. Kayla glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Fun isn't the word I'd use. He chuckled softly, and for the first time, Kayla didn't mind the sound, changed forever. The silence in the cockpit was profound, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's engines as it drifted away from the collapsing moon. Through the viewport, Kayla and Jack watched the destruction unfold, an entire celestial body breaking apart in slow, cataclysmic beauty. Blue energy rippled across the surface like lightning, and fragments of rock spiraled into the void. Kayla sat back in her chair, her hand still gripping the controls tightly. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her breathing. It was over. They had survived. Jack, slouched in the co-pilot's seat, broke the silence. Well, that's one for the books. Kayla turned her head slowly to look at him. He was battered and bruised, his jacket torn, but there was a calmness in his demeanor that felt infuriatingly reassuring. For someone who had just stared death in the face, he seemed far too relaxed. "You're insane," she said finally, her voice flat. Jack grinned, though it didn't reach his tired eyes. "Maybe. But I'm alive. And so are you." Kayla opened her mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, she found herself staring at him, a realization creeping into her mind. For all his recklessness and bravado, Jack had been the one to act when it mattered most. He had been the one to save her, to risk everything for her survival. That kind of courage wasn't something she encountered often, not in the polished halls of her home, where loyalty was often bought and courage was a performance. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. Jack looked at her, his expression softening. "Why not?" "That's not an answer," Kayla pressed. He shrugged, leaning back in his seat. "Maybe I just don't like seeing people die if I can help it, even if they're difficult." Kayla raised an eyebrow. "Difficult? All right, impossible," Jack corrected with a smirk. She should have been angry, but instead, she found herself laughing. A short, incredulous sound that startled even her. It was the first time she had laughed in days, and it felt strange but oddly welcome. Jack chuckled as well, the tension between them easing. See, not so impossible after all. Kayla's smile faded, and she turned her gaze back to the viewport. The destroyed moon was a reminder of how close they had come to the end. It also served as a reminder of Jack's humanity, his willingness to put himself in harm's way for someone he barely knew. "I misjudged you," she admitted, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. She wasn't used to apologies, let alone to a human. Jack glanced at her, surprised. "Is that your way of saying thank you?" "Don't push it," she replied, though the corner of her mouth twitched upward. He grinned and leaned forward, studying the ship's controls. "You know, this thing's got a lot of power now that it's patched up. You could probably outrun a cruiser with this baby." Kayla's gaze softened as she watched him. "And yet, you'd still call it a fancy toy." Jack laughed. "Well, I'm not wrong." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the weight of their ordeal settling in. Kayla's mind drifted to the life waiting for her back on Arathos Prime. The formalities, the expectations, the endless power struggles. It all felt so distant now, so unimportant compared to the raw survival they had just experienced. "Jack," she said suddenly, her tone thoughtful. He looked at her, one eyebrow raised. "Yeah. What if?" She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "What if I offered you a partnership?" Jack blinked, clearly caught off guard. "A partnership? What kind?" Kayla gestured to the ship around them. "You're resourceful, skilled, annoying, but tolerable. And I have the resources to explore places like that moon, to uncover the secrets they hide. Jack tilted his head, studying her. You're serious? Deadly, Kayla replied, meeting his gaze. Think about it. Together, we could go farther than either of us could alone. Jack rubbed his chin, a thoughtful grin spreading across his face. Well, I do like a good adventure, and it's not every day you get to partner with royalty. Kayla rolled her eyes. Don't call me that. Fine, Jack said, extending a hand toward her. Deal, Kayla. She looked at his hand for a moment before taking it, her grip firm. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just in Heiress, an image of perfection molded by others. She was Kayla, a survivor, an explorer, and perhaps a partner. As the ship sailed into the vast expanse of space, Kayla allowed herself a small smile. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she didn't face it alone.